Now, I'll tell you what you're going to do, and I'll tell you what you can do. You're going to recut Nightwind, and you're going to cut it exactly the way I tell you to cut it. Never! Then, by God, if it's the last thing I do, I'll fix it so you never do another picture in this town as long as you live! Oh, my God!
How much you want to bet that this happened at least once in Hollywood? We live in a very interesting time in entertainment history, where not only are the movies and the shows themselves becoming bigger, but so are how successful they can become. What was once considered a dream for one to earn over $1 billion at the box office, now it's an achievable goal that occasionally happens every year. In fact, the idea of a film making $2 billion can also be considered a possibility. But at the same time, as the old saying goes, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. And that's one thing Hollywood doesn't like to talk about. As much as the success of their movies are getting bigger, so is the size of their failures, and that results in highlighting the mismanagement going on in their respective studios. And trust me, all the big studios in Hollywood got problems. Maybe some are doing better than others, but as of this review, everyone's got their own set of issues that's costing them money. Warner Brothers is canceling fully made films to turn them into cheap tax write-downs, Universal is continuously running franchises to the ground, Disney is making it impossible for their movies to make a profit by being too generous with their budgets, Paramount is on the verge of being bought out or get merged with someone else, Sony is becoming increasingly dependent on Spider-Man to survive, and even that franchise is starting to make them lose money, Lionsgate needs luck to make movies that could keep them considered a major studio, and streaming platforms like Netflix are constantly removing projects that were only available there while simultaneously inflating their subscription prices. As much as there are still some good happening, we can technically say that we are living in an age of calamity in Hollywood, or that debatably there has been more calamity in Hollywood than ever before. And this is not even to mention about some of the other problems that would frequently occur, such as the strikes and the multitudes of scandals. And while all these problems would keep happening again and again, it makes you wonder what the fridge is happening in Hollywood. Now, this is why I want to go and propose a little quick exercise to do. Now, let's say that we can be that fly on the wall. You know the one I'm talking about. The one who is able to go and buzz around Hollywood and get a chance to hear all those executive meetings whenever things go horribly wrong with their latest pictures. Like you go to Disney and you hear about how their films keep being sabotaged by their own overblown budgets. Or you go to Sony and hear about their options now that making Spider-Man doesn't always guarantee success. Or you go to Warner Brothers and see how they deal with damage control after the backlash they received from canceling another fully made feature. It's during those crazy moments where they were given big L's that make people wonder what is happening in Hollywood. Well, honestly, I cannot give you a definitive answer. But maybe this movie can. Created by the director of most of the Pink Panther movies and Breakfast at Tiffany's, Blake Edwards, S.o.b. is his interpretation of a film about Hollywood. But this isn't your typical movie about making movies. This one goes into the darker side of the industry. In fact, some say that this is the blackest comedy both by Edwards and in the subgenre. Allegedly, the inspiration of the picture came from his experience at Paramount Pictures when making his 1970 film Darling Lily, which was a critical and financial flop. Some even went further to theorize that it's kind of semi-autobiographical, where it was based on his perspective of the way Paramount was responsible for that film's failure with their interference, and how they did next to nothing with the advertising. While there is no confirmation if this is the case or not, I did find this interview where Edwards himself hinted that there might be some truth to it.
Well, but wait a minute. If you think about S.o.b., nothing's impossible in this town. And that's the statement that it makes. So why not end up at Paramount, the studio that inspired the film?
But he was able to get it made after his career had a comeback thanks to the Pink Panther sequels like Return, Strikes Again, and Revenge. However, when it was time to distribute it in 1981, guess who ended up taking the job? Yep, it was Paramount. And as mad as Blake was that they're back in the picture, The same thing pretty much happened where they didn't do much to promote the movie and it ended up a flop. Seriously, even the making of this film is like a black comedy in itself.
You stole my film! Phoenix! I'll steal your car!
While this certainly isn't Blake Edwards' most popular picture, this is noted to be his most divided. Like, people were either absolutely loving this movie or they absolutely hate it. And the best proof of that is actually during awards season, where the movie was nominated for Best Writing at the Writers Guild of America Awards, and at the same time, it was nominated for Worst Writing at the Razzies. And that's not the only one either. It was also nominated for Best Picture in the Comedy or Musical category at the Golden Globes, and then it was nominated for Worst Director at, again, the Razzies. So this really does highlight how this movie is absolutely split amongst people, especially those in Hollywood. And if there is any credibility to the claims that this is based on Edwards' experience with Darling Lily, then the story is a little too familiar, where it goes and answers the question, what does Hollywood do when a movie bombs? As much as we only focus on the movies themselves and how much money they lost for the companies nowadays, S.o.b takes a look at the filmmakers and the executives of those films and how they cope with failure. In this case, acclaimed producer Felix Farmer just had his first bomb after a good career of nothing but hits. He was pretty much ready to unsubscribe from life, but suddenly had an idea of how he could turn things around for his disaster to get a second chance.
Thanks, Tully! That's the answer! We'll give them a $40 million pornographic, epic!
That's right, he's gonna reboot his family-friendly film Nightwind into an art house porno. And all the people around him, like the executives, assistants, the press, and more, could only watch as his passion is now completely controlled by his madness. As much as this looks like a character-driven picture where the cast tries to deal with Farmer's craziness, this is actually a satire of the Hollywood system, where, in a way, that is as much of a central figure here as the people. Now, when I say that it shows its darker side, I don't necessarily mean anything evil or sinister. It's more how the system's biggest priority is to make money through movies, and how that takes importance more than any morals or principles, to the point that honor and dignity in that business is virtually non-existent. It's filled with people who would do anything to climb their way to the top, and when they're not having wild orgy parties or persuade the cops to look the other way, they focus on how their brand can remain profitable. And the best way to show Hollywood's lack of conscience is with Felix. Like I said, throughout the first act, all he could think about after his biggest film flopped was ending his life. And when he found that spark to save his movie, he goes completely insane. And yet, despite people seeming to be worried about Felix, no one's actually worried about Felix's well-being. How he's feeling is an irrelevant subject to just about everyone, and the only time he matters is when his condition may hinder their profits or their reputation. Especially when the studio he worked for, Capitol Pictures, signed a strict contract with Farmer that gives him a lot of creative control.
I want to recut Nightwind, but Felix has an ironclad contract.
And this is where the black comedy can be found. It all comes from the absurdity in people's ignorance. Everybody is so preoccupied with their own needs and desires that a person they know trying to expire themselves is invisible to them. And they're willing to follow the guide of a lunatic just for the possibility of earning greater rewards. The jokes are all from the system, making people sacrifice their sense of empathy and decency in order to maintain their fame and fortune.
Well, right now, he's heavily sedated, sir. Dr. Irving Feingarten?
If he doesn't remember me, mention his first clap. I didn't give it to him, I cured him.
Now, from the way that I'm describing it, it sounds like this movie is just filled with horrible people. And I will admit that, yeah, they all pretty much are. But then again, that is the point in order to emphasize the message of how messed up Hollywood can be. And if there is one thing that I do want to really give this movie credit, well, at least another thing to go and give this credit, is actually in regards to the actors, where they make all the characters here delightfully despicable. One of the strengths of S.o.b. is that it features a solid cast who represent the type of people you'd find in the industry, and how they can be pretty messed up as individuals. Of course, you have the creatives like the producer Felix Farmer and his lustful directing buddy Tim Cully, played by Willem Holden in his final film role.
For the last 40 years, I've lived a life of dedicated debauchery. I've consumed enough booze to destroy a dozen healthy livers. I've filled my lungs with enough nicotine to poison the entire population of Orange County. I've indulged in sexual excesses that would make Caligula look like a celibate monk.
The assistants like the nervous press agent Ben Coogan, the secretary that wants to be a producer, Gary Murdoch, and the witty physician, Dr. Irving Feinegarten, who just doesn't care about standards anymore.
You're gonna let that shyster on?
I could sue you for calling me that, Polly. A shyster is a disreputable lawyer. I'm a quack.
And you have the others like the executives at Capitol Studios, led by David Blackman, whom the only thing that matters to them is to make their movies profitable, and the entitled journalist, Polly Reed, who thinks she's able to either empower or destroy careers.
David! David! This maniac insulted me and physically prevented me from going through that door!
Of course, as a satire, these are exaggerated representations of those figures, and the actors' performances can sometimes go over the top to the point that it does play in the film's make-or-break reputation. For me, though, I really enjoy the acting, and they help establish this to be a quirky comedy with something to say. And the crazier the actors are, the more they stand out with how they were giving it their all. Some of my personal highlights include Robert Preston as Dr. Irving, who cares more about getting the job done, Robert Webber as Ben, who is always panicking over what the headlines might say about his clients, and of course, Richard Mulligan as Felix Farmer. He deserves a lot of credit for the way he took all of the sanity out of his eyes, and the only reality that exists for him is his art. From his failed attempt of unaliving himself after his perfect track record was ruined, to desperately doing anything and everything to bring his newfound creative vision to life.
Felix, for God's sake.
Think of it, David, like the phoenix rising from the ashes. Nightwind will become the greatest money-making film in motion picture history. Today, a $30 million flop. Tomorrow, a $40 million box office champion!
But then there is the leading actress of the film, and one whose character I have yet to talk about. She is the wife of Felix Farmer, and the star of his failed movie Nightwind. And when it was time for Felix to go and make his revised version of the picture, she is put in a very uncomfortable position that could end up staining her clean reputation. And I guess it's not a coincidence in which Blake Edwards decided to hire his own wife to go and play that particular character in her most adult role of her career. Oh, and did I forget to mention that Blake Edwards was married to Julie Andrews?
Oh, shit!
Yes, you heard that right. The icon who played Mary Poppins and Maria Von Trapp herself is featured in an R-rated movie. And just said, oh shit. Her role as Sally Miles is pretty much a parody of herself, a beloved Oscar-winning actress married to a big-name filmmaker. And just like everyone else in the film, she only cares about maintaining her family-friendly image, but is now put to the test with Felix's hornier update of Nightwind and putting her in a high-risk, high-reward situation, putting in place the movie's most anticipated moment.
I've got to show my boobies.
If nothing else, what S.o.b. is most well known for is being the only time that we got to see Julie Andrews show, as she puts it so elegantly, her boobies.
In one memorable scene in S.o.b., Julie Andrews showed us that the hills are still alive.
And honestly, it shows that Edwards thought his wife was a goddess, because I've never seen a movie build up so much anticipation for a moment where its leading actress was about to take her top off. In fact, the whole porno version of Nightwind was just an entire setup to say, here comes Julie's tits! And the whole thing makes you wait and build up that hype with all that art house sexual imagery. Then a bit of hesitation and had to be drugged up to continue. And the suspense later keeps on rising, and then... Yep, there it is. Those are boobs that Julie Andrews has, all right. And no surprise that the movie applauds itself for that accomplishment. All while I'm sitting there registering the fact that I just saw Mary Poppins take her top off. Hey, Doc, I'm still trying to process this. Can you fill in the rest of my thoughts on this one?
Well, since I can only render an evaluation based on a completely impersonal, purely professional examination of the subjects, I would have to say that in my humble opinion, you've got a terrific pair of knockers.
Hey.
But with that said, I won't say that everything this movie does is spot on. There are a few criticisms that I do have to mention. One being this side plot that it continuously cuts to with this actor who starts off having a heart attack near Farmer's Beach House and a dog who always wants to stick by his body. Maybe there's some kind of metaphorical meaning related to what's going on in the picture, but for the most part, it doesn't make it clear what it is, and it feels more like just random filler that, unless someone can find a good explanation for why those scenes are here, I don't think the movie really needed. That, and not only are there things that age as badly as people with Botox, but they can also be pretty pointless. I mean, there's no reason to have racial stereotypes like this angry Chinese chef running around. Maybe the cringe Mickey Rooney pulled off just wasn't enough for Edwards.
I tried his beach number, and I got some deranged Chinaman.
Then again, they don't hinder too much on the overall experience, and they especially don't take away from the feature's commentary. And if it wasn't clear enough during most of the movie, the ending is where the message hits the hardest. Keep in mind that I will be going into spoilers here, so if you want to avoid that, just skip to here and you won't have to worry about it. So, now that I got that out of the way, the biggest moment where it highlights the system's lack of integrity is after Felix passed away from getting shot by the police. It is the only time where his closest allies, Tim, Ben, and Dr. Irving, suddenly gained a conscience because a friend of theirs is now gone. And they didn't want him to go through that staged funeral that the studio set up. Instead, they kidnapped the body and performed a Viking funeral by burning his body on a small boat. This is the perfect example of why this movie is called S.o.b, which, by the way, stands for
Standard Operational Bullshit.
Because that is what Edwards is trying to say on how Hollywood works. There's no dignity to be found within the system. It's all run by money and public image, and this is perfectly illustrated by Farmer's organized funeral. On the outside, it's all massive, beautifully decorated, and filled with hundreds of people who had a connection with him. But not only did the funeral directors didn't care to tell them that they don't have his actual body for the sake of making their own business look good, and the people were mainly there just to hear Sally Miles sing. But what was mostly talked about was not Farmer as a person, but only his movies and the update to Nightwind.
But what greater tribute than to quote from the Hollywood motion picture textuary? Can you see that? Night wind, be a hurricane. 3-point mill take in 7 cities, Labor Weekend. Cap VP Blackman predicts 200 mil world gross.
In contrast, the three decided to hijack him from that hollow place and give him the kind of funeral that offers something he never had in Hollywood, and that is honor. A centuries-old ritual meant to symbolize a proper travel to the afterlife and to respect not his works, but who he is throughout his life.
So long, pal.
And let me see it.
Okay, I actually just got a crazy idea, and I don't know if this is something that would only end up adding to the problems that's going on with Hollywood, but how awesome would it be if someone would go and make a modern remake of S.o.b? Like, have it be set in today's age where blockbusters are just commonly pushed out like week after week on a regular basis, and you also include streaming onto the scenario, but you still go and stay true to call out with Hollywood's systemic problems and try to go and highlight what they would do whenever they would be faced with a massive box office bomb. Like, seriously, how awesome would that be? Now, the likelihood of that happening though, well, let's be honest, it may not actually occur. But hey, it's just a little idea, and even if that may not happen in real life, at the very least, we still have this movie. And even though nowadays it's like over 40 years old, I feel like what it's trying to say, it's still relevant today. In this age of studios making stupid money-losing mistakes and increasing amount of box office bombs, S.o.b. is one of the few movies made in Hollywood that isn't afraid to call out what is wrong with the Hollywood system and its lack of human decency. I wouldn't say that everything about this movie is great, and there are some things that are unnecessary to include, but it nails the commentary about the industry's corporate greed and absence of standards to expose the ugly side of fame and fortune, all presented with outrageous comedy that can get some good laughs and enjoyable performances from the cast. I'll admit that this movie could be an acquired taste and not everyone will be on board with its black humor and scandalous scenes, but I truly believe that this deserves a second chance to get some recognition from the public, especially with how everyone's been increasingly upset with studios and executives. If you're someone who's mad at Hollywood because of all the remakes, sequels, and unoriginality frequently coming out of them, or frustrated that their work ethic is a disaster and how that is obviously the cause of many terrible decisions, then I think you'll have a good time with this movie. And on that note, if you had a good time with this review, then how about giving this a like and subscribe to my channel, where you could join me in finding many interesting discoveries like this one. And if I gotta give this movie a rating, I'm more on the side of those who really like it. And I'll give this an 8 out of 10. I'd even go as far and say that this is possibly Blake Edwards' most underrated picture. Sure, this is a pretty messed up movie, but it is still not as messed up as Hollywood. And I gotta admit that S.o.b. is not wrong.